Shalom, 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 everybody. Shalom, everybody. It's your boy Shalom. Your boy Shalom. Get up here and read today. We're going to read today. Law 29 of the 48 Laws of Power. 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, a Joyce Elfer's book. Law 29. Next law in the edition. Plan all the way to the end. Plan all the way to the end. Judgment. Judgment. The ending is everything. Plan all the way to it, taking into account all the possible consequences, obstacles, and twists of fortune that might reserve your hard work and give you the glory to others, and give the glory to others. By planning to the end, you will not be overwhelmed by circumstances, and you will know when to stop. Gently guide fortune and help determine the future by thinking far ahead. Transgression of the law. Transgression of the law. In 1510, a ship set out from the island of Hispaniola, now Haiti in the Dominican Republic, from Venezuela, where it was to rescue a besieged Spanish colony. Several miles out of port, a stowaway climbed out of a provision chest. Vasco Nunez de Balboa, a noble Spaniard who had come to the New World in search of gold, but had fallen in debt and had escaped his creditors by hiding in the chest. Balboa had been obsessed with gold ever since Columbus had returned to Spain from his voyages with tales of a fabulous but yet undiscovered kingdom called El Dorado. Balboa was one of the first adventurers to come in search of Columbus's land of gold, and he had decided from the beginning that he would be the one to find it, through sheer audacity and single-mindedness. Now that he was free of his creditors, nothing would stop him. Unfortunately, the ship's owner, a wealthy jurist named Francesco Fernandez de Enciso. Francisco Fernandez de Enciso was furious when told of the stowaway, and he ordered that Balboa be left on the first island they came across. Before they found any island, however, Enciso received news that the colony he was to rescue had been abandoned. This was Balboa's chance. He told the sailors of his previous voyages to Panama and of the rumors he had heard of gold in the area. The excited sailors convinced Enciso that to spare Balboa's life and to establish a colony in Panama. Weeks later, they named their new settlement Darien. Darien's first governor was Enciso, but Balboa was not a man to let others steal the initiative. He campaigned against Enciso among the sailors, who eventually made it clear that they preferred him as governor. Enciso fled to Spain, fearing for his life. Months later, when a representative of the Spanish crown arrived to establish himself as the new official governor of Darien, he was turned away. On his return voyage to Spain, this man drowned. The drowning was accidental, but under Spanish law, Balboa had murdered the governor and usurped his position. Balboa's bravado had got him out of scrape before, but now his hopes of wealth and glory seemed doomed. To lay claim to El Dorado, should he discover it, he would need the approval of the Spanish king, which, as an outlaw, he would never receive. There was only one solution. Panamanian Indians had told Balboa of a vast ocean on the other side of the Central American isthmus. That's like an island, an isthmus. 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 Let's see. Right there. Isthmus. A narrow strip of land joining two larger tracts. The isthmus. Isthmus. A narrow strip of land. There was only one solution. Panamanian Indians had told Balboa of a vast ocean on the other side of the Central American narrow strip of land, joining the two together, or the isthmus, and had said by traveling south upon the western coast, he would reach a fabulous land of gold, called by a name that to his ears sounded like Biru. Balboa decided he would cross the treacherous jungles of Panama and become the first European to bathe his feet in the new ocean. From there, he would march on El Dorado. If he did this in Spain, on Spain's behalf, he would obtain the eternal gratitude of the king and would secure his own reprieve. Excuse me. Only he had to act before Spanish authorities came to arrest him. In 1513, then, Balboa set out with 190 soldiers halfway across the isthmus, some 90 miles wide at that point. Only 60 soldiers remained, many having succumbed to the harsh conditions, the blood-sucking insects, the torrential rainfall, or fever. Finally, from the mountaintop, Balboa became the first European to lay eyes on the Pacific Ocean. Days later, he marched in his armor into his waters, bearing the banner of Castile and claiming all its seas, lands, and islands in the name of the Spanish throne. Indians from the area greeted Balboa with gold, jewels, and precious pearls, the like of which he had never seen. When he asked where these had come from, the Indians pointed south to the land of the Incas, but Balboa had only a few soldiers left. For the moment, he decided he should return to send the jewels. When news reached Spain of Balboa's bold crossing of the isthmus, his discovery of the Western Ocean, and his planned conquest of El Dorado, the former criminal became a hero. He was instantly proclaimed governor of the new land. But before the king and queen received word of his discovery, they had already sent a dozen ships under the command of a man named Pedro Arias de Villa, Pedrarius, with orders to arrest Balboa for murder and to take command of the colony. By the time Pedrarius arrived in Panama, he had learned that Balboa had been pardoned and that he was to share his governorship with the former outlaw. All the same, Balboa felt uneasy. Gold was his dream. El Dorado has his only desire. In pursuit of his gold, he had nearly died many times over, and to share the wealth and glory with a newcomer would be intolerable. He also soon discovered that Pedrarius was a jealous, bitter man, and equally unhappy with the situation. Once again, the only situation was for Balboa was to seize the initiative by proposing to cross the jungle with a large army, carrying shipbuilding materials and tools. Once on the Pacific coast, he would create an armada and with which to conquer the Incas. Surprisingly enough, Pedrarius agreed to the plan, perhaps sensing it would never work. Hundreds died in the second march through the jungle, and the timber they carried rotted in the torrential rains. Balboa, as usual, was undaunted. No power in the world could thwart his plan. And on the arriving at the Pacific, he began to cut down trees for new lumber. But the men remaining to him were too few and too weak to mount an invasion. And once again, Balboa had to return to Darien. Pedraeus had in any case invited Balboa back to discuss a new plan. And on the outskirts of the settlement, the explorer was met by Francesco Pizarro, an old friend who had accompanied him on his first crossing of the isthmus. But this was a trap. Leading 100 soldiers, Pizarro surrounded his former friend, arrested him, and returned him to Pedraeus, who tried him on charges of rebellion. A few days later, Balboa's head fell into a basket, along with those of his most trusted followers. Years later, Pizarro himself reached Peru, and Balboa's deeds were forgotten. Damn. Took his shine. Most men are ruled by the heart, not the head. Their plans are vague, and when they meet obstacles, they improvise. But improvisation will only bring you as far as the next crisis, and is never a substitute for thinking several steps ahead and planning to the end. Balboa had a dream of glory and wealth, and a vague plan to reach it. Yet his bold deeds and his discovery of the Pacific are largely forgotten. For he committed what in the world of power is the ultimate sin. He went part way, leaving the door open for others to take over. A real man of power would have had the prudence to see the dangers in the distance, the rivals who would want to share in the conquest, the vultures that would hover once they heard the word gold. Balboa should have kept his knowledge of the Inca secret until after he had conquered Peru. Only then would his wealth and his head have been secure. What's up? You coming up here? Don't worry about it. You good. Blah, 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 blah. Once Pedraeus arrived on the scene, a man of power and prudence would have schemed to kill or imprison him, and to take over the army he had brought for the conquest of Peru. But Balboa was locked in the moment, always reacting emotionally, never thinking ahead. What good is to have the greatest dream in the world if others reap the benefits of the glory? What good is it to have the greatest dream in the world if others reap the benefits of your glory? Never lose your head over a vague, open-ended dream. Plan to the end. Observance of the law. In 1863, the Peruvian premier Otto von Bismarck surveyed the chessboard of European power as it then stood. The main players were England, France, and Austria. Prussia itself was one of the several states in the loosely allied German Federation. Austria, dominant member of the Federation, made sure that the other German states remained weak, divided, and submissive. Bismarck believed that Prussia was destined for something far greater than servant boy to Austria. This is how Bismarck played the game. His first move was to start a war with the lowly Denmark in order to recover the former Prussian lands of Schleswig-Holstein. He knew that these rumblings of Prussian independence might worry France and England, so he enlisted Austria in the war, claiming that he was recovering Schleswig-Holstein for their benefit. In a few months after the war was decided, Bismarck demanded that the newly conquered lands be made part of Prussia. The Austrians, of course, were furious, but they compromised. First, they agreed to give the Peruvians Schleswig, and a year later, they sold them Holstein. The world began to see that Austria was weakening and that Prussia was on the rise. Bismarck's next move was his boldest. In 1866, he convinced King William of Prussia to withdraw from the German Federation, and in doing so to go to war with Austria itself. King William's wife, his son, the crown prince, and the princes of the other German kingdoms vehemently opposed such a war. But Bismarck, undaunted, succeeded in forcing the conflict, and Prussia's superior army defeated the Austrians in the brutally short 7 weeks war. The king of Prussia, the king and the Prussian general then wanted to march on Vienna, taking as much land from Austria as possible, but Bismarck stopped them. Now he presented himself as on the side of peace. The result was that he was able to conclude a treaty with Austria that granted Prussia and the other German states total autonomy. Bismarck could now position Prussia as a dominant power in Germany and the head of a newly formed North German Confederation. The French and English began to compare Bismarck to Attila the Hun, and to fear that he had designs on all of it, and stirred up his own king against the French. To no one's surprise, war broke out in 1870. No, I'm over here. In 1870, the newly formed German Federation enthusiastically joined in the war on France. Excuse me. And once again, the Prussian military machine and its allies destroyed the enemy army in a matter of months. Although Bismarck opposed taking any French land, the generals convinced him that Alsace-Lorraine would become part of the Federation. Now all of Europe feared the next move of the Prussian monster, led by Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor. And in fact, a year later, Bismarck founded the German Empire, with the Prussian king as a newly crowned empire and Bismarck himself as prince. But then something strange happened. Bismarck instigated no more wars. And while the other European powers grabbed up land from colonies in other continents, he severely limited Germany's colonial acquisitions. He did not want more land for Germany, but more security. For the rest of his life, he struggled to maintain peace in Europe and to prevent further wars. Yes, right here. Everybody assumed he had changed, mellowing with the years. They had failed to understand this was the final move of his original plan. Interpretation. There's a simple reason why most men never know when to come off the attack. They form no concrete ideas of their goal. Once they achieve victory, they only hunger for more. To stop, to aim for the goal, and then to keep it seems almost inhuman. In fact, yet nothing is more critical to the maintenance of power. The person who goes too far in his triumphs creates the reaction that inevitably leads to a decline. The only solution is to plan for the long run, foresee the future with as much clarity as the gods on Mount Olympus, who look through the clouds and see the ends of all things. From the beginning of his career in politics, no, sir, I'm right here. Right here. From the beginning of his career in politics, Bismarck had one goal: to form an independent German state led by Prussia. He instigated the war with Denmark not to conquer territory, but to stir up Prussian nationalism and unite the country. He incited the war with Austria only to gain the Prussian independence. This was why he refused to grab Austria's territory. And he fomented He fermented. Fermented. I think it's not fermented, it's fermented. Fomented. Fermented. You trying to get down? You don't have to. Foment. Fomentation. Let's see. I'll go with that. Foment. To arouse or stimulate. Fomentation. All right. And he aroused the war with France to foment, or he aroused, or he fomented the war with France to unite the German kingdoms against a common enemy, and thus to prepare for the formation of the United Germany. Get out of my dictionary. Get out of my dictionary, my boy. Once this was achieved, Bismarck stopped. He never let triumph go to his head. Was never tempted to be the siren call of more. Excuse me. Was never tempted by the siren call of more. He held the reins tightly, and whenever the generals or the king or the Perusian people demanded new conquests, he held them back. Nothing would spoil the beauty of his creation. Certainly not false euphoria that pushed those around him to attempt to go past the end that he had so carefully planned. Experience shows that if one foresees from far away the designs to be undertaken, one can act with speed when the moment comes to execute them. Experience shows that if one foresees from far away the designs to be undertaken, one can act with speed when the moments come to execute them. Cardinal Richelieu, 1585 to 1642. Stop grabbing on me. Keys to power. According to the cosmology of the ancient Greeks, the gods were thought to have complete vision into the future. They saw everything to come, right down to the intricate details. Men, on the other hand, were seen as victims of fate, trapped in the moment and their emotions, unable to see beyond immediate dangers. Those heroes, such as Odysseus, who were able to lead beyond the present and plan several steps ahead, seemed to defy fate, to approximate the gods in their ability to determine the future. The comparison is still valid. Those among us who think further ahead and patiently bring their plans to fruition seem to have a godlike power, because most people are too imprisoned in the moment to plan with this kind of foresight. The ability to ignore immediate dangers and pleasures translates into power. It is the power of being able to overcome the natural human tendency to react to things as they happen, and instead to train oneself to step back, imagining the larger things taking shape beyond one's immediate vision. Most people believe that they are in fact aware of the future, that they are planning and thinking ahead. They are usually deluded. They are usually deluded. Most people believe that they are in fact aware of the future, that they are planning and thinking ahead. They are usually deluded. What they are really doing is succumbing to their desires, to what they want the future to be. Their plans are vague, based on their imaginations rather than their reality. They may believe they are thinking all the way to the end, but they are really only focusing on the happy ending. Sorry. They are really only focused on the happy ending and deluding themselves by the strength of their desires. In 415 BC, the ancient Athenians attacked Sicily, believing their expedition would bring them riches, power, and a glorious ending to the 16-year Peloponnesian War. They did not consider the dangers of the invasion so far from home. They did not foresee that the Sicilians would fight all the harder since the battles were on their own homeland, or that all of Athens' enemies would band together against them, or that war would break out on several fronts, stretching their forces way too thin. The Sicilian expedition was a complete disaster, led to the destruction of one of the greatest civilizations of all time. The Athenians were led into this disaster by their hearts, not their minds. They saw only the chance of glory, not the dangers that loomed in the distance. Cardinal de Retz, the 17th century Frenchman who prided himself on his insights into human schemes and why they mostly fail, analyzed this phenomenon. In the course of the rebellion, he spearheaded against the French monarchy in 1651. The young king, Louis XIV, and his court had suddenly left Paris and established themselves in a palace outside the capital. The presence of the king so close to the heart of the revolution had been a tremendous burden on the revolutionaries, and they breathed a sigh of relief. A sigh of relief. This later proved their downfall. However, since the court's absence from Paris gave it much more room to maneuver, the most ordinary cause of people's mistakes, Cardinal de Retz later wrote, is there being too much frightened at the present danger, and not enough so at that which is remote. The most ordinary cause of people's mistakes, Cardinal de Retz later wrote, is there being too much frightened at the present danger, and not enough so at that which is remote. The dangers that are remote, that loom in the distance, if we can see them as they take shape, how many mistakes may we avoid? How many plans would instantly abort if we realized we were avoiding a small danger only to step into a larger one? So much of power is not what you do, but what you don't do. The rash and foolish actions that you refrain from before they get you into trouble. Plan in detail before you act. Do not let vague plans lead you into trouble. Will this have unintended consequences? Will I stir up new enemies? Will someone else take advantage of my labors? Unhappy endings are much more common than happy ones. Do not be swayed by the happy ending in your mind. The French elections of 1848 came down to a struggle between Louis Adolphe Thiers, the man of order, and General Louis Eugene Cavaignac, the rabble rouser of the right. When Thiers realized he was hopelessly behind in the high-stakes race, he searched desperately for a solution. His eye fell on Louis Bonaparte, grandnephew of the great General Napoleon, and a lowly deputy in Parliament. This Bonaparte seemed a bit of an imbecile, but his name alone could get him elected in a court yearning for pushed off stage. The first part of the plan worked to perfection, and Napoleon was elected by a large margin. The problem was that Thiers had not foreseen one simple fact. This imbecile was in fact a man of enormous ambition. 3 years later, he dissolved Parliament, declared himself emperor, and ruled France for another 18 years, much to the horror of Thiers and his party. The ending is everything. It is the end of the action that determines who gets the glory, the money, the prize. Your conclusion must be crystal clear and you must keep what do you need that life for? And you must keep it constantly in mind. You must always figure out how the ward of the vultures circling overhead. Excuse me. You must always figure out how to ward off the vultures circling overhead, trying to live off the carcass of your creation. And you must anticipate the many possible crises that will tempt you to improvise. Bismarck overcame these dangers because he planned to the end, kept on course through every crisis, and never let others steal the glory. Once he had reached his stated goal, he withdrew into his shell like a turtle. This kind of self-control is godlike. I got you. When you see several steps ahead and plan your moves all the way to the end, you will no longer be tempted by emotion or by the desire to improvise. Your clarity will rid you of the anxiety and vagueness that are the primary reasons why so many fail to conclude their actions successfully. You see the ending and you tolerate no deviation. Image. The gods on Mount Olympus, looking down on human actions from the clouds. They see in advance the endings of all the great dreams that lead to disaster and tragedy. And they laugh in our inability to see beyond the moment and at how we delude ourselves. Authority. How much easier is it never to get in than how much easier it is never to get in than to get yourself out. We should act contrary to the reed which, when it first appears, throws up a long straight stem, but afterwards, as though it were exhausted, makes several dense knots, indicating that it no longer has the original vigor and drive. We must rather begin gently and coolly, saving our breath for the encounter and our vigorous thrusts for finishing off the job. In their beginnings, it is we who guard affairs and hold them in our power. But so often, once they are set in motion, it is they which guide us and sweep us along. Montague, 1533 to 1592. Reversal. It is cliche among strategists that your plan must include alternatives and have a degree of flexibility. That is certainly true. If you are locked into a plan too rigidly, you will be unable to deal with sudden shifts of fortune. Once you have examined the future possibilities and decided on your target, you must build in alternatives and be open to new routes toward your goal. Most people, however, lose less from over-planning and rigidity than from vagueness and the tendency to improvise constantly in the face of circumstance. There is no real purpose in contemplating a reversal to this law. Then, for no good can come from refusing to think far into the future and planning to the end. If you are clear and far-thinking enough, you will understand that the future is uncertain and that you must be open to adaptation. Only having a clear objective and a far-reaching plan allows you that freedom. That was Law 29. Law 29. Plan all the way to the end. Plan all the way to the end. Judgment. The ending is everything. Plan all the way to it, taking into account all the possible consequences, obstacles, and twists of fortune that might reverse your hard work and give the glory to others. By planning to the end, you will not be overwhelmed by circumstances, and you will know when to stop. Gently guide fortune and help determine the fortune by thinking far ahead. That's Law 29. Next up will be Law 30 next time. Law 30. Make your accomplishments. Stop writing on my stuff. Make your accomplishments seem effortless. Make your accomplishments seem effortless. All right, everybody. That was Law 29 of the 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, a Joyce Elfers book. Till next time. Thank y'all for everybody who stayed with me. Until next time. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Bye, y'all.